Welcome to the September 17th OpenZFS production user call. We have Andrew, Jan, Alexander, and myself, Michael, so far. And I found a nice write-up of the upcoming OpenZFS user and developer summit in the FreeBSD events page, but the text was quite out of date, so I quickly made it a little better, but I welcome you to all submit feedback on what better ways to portray this event, because I can't see the forest from the trees on it. Someday I will think to promote the fact that I am accepting Patreon for these types of efforts, but I always forget that. Alexander kindly pointed out a mildly dramatic set of posts on which mailing list? That is the FreeBSD stable mailing list about a loader change that enables OpenZFS features on FreeBSD, but specifically on i386, and it sounds like it sacrifices the graphical bootloader. We did have a quick discussion about how ZFS has definitely improved on i386 with regard to, say, nonlinear kernel heap usage. But hey, Alexander and Jan, is there anything you just want to throw into that mix, or was that a pretty accurate description? And of course, 386 is dead, right? Well, not until it's, dead, and some people will
Well,
have it forever. I don't know. It's on
it's
a
also
satellite.
worth
It's not coming back home. Go ahead.
it's also worth noting that, I mean, at least on the Solaris side, we still had 32-bit Solaris floating around when ZFS was created. So they do overlap.
There you go. That's a good point. And don't get me wrong, ZFS is old enough that was it in fact, granted, Sun is a special case with regards to CPU architectures, but to what
I
degree was it
specifically
developed in
mean
on 32-bit?
I specifically mean 32-bit x86
Okay, got
was
it.
still
Let me
floating
put that
around
in.
I
because
don't think 32-bit Spark was still around, right?
I don't think so, but I'm a little more fuzzy on Spark. I mean, Spark killed 30. I mean, Spark went 64-bit pretty early, I want to say.
Okay. Uh, cool. I want to move on pretty quickly. Another thing, Jan, this came up, and it came up in the context of a review or PR. Is Actually, it may have been relation to this one at first. Is PAM-ZFS key.so working as expected? On a previous call, you mentioned that a user with an encrypted data set might get locked out. I gave it a try
So
on 15.0 Alpha 1, and I'm just trying to get a clear picture on that.
I've only done a little bit of testing with encrypted home DS using ZFS dataset encryption. The really annoying part is that the FreeBSD installer asks users if when they use the ZFS install path,
Mm-hmm.
so the FreeBSD ZFS install path, then they ask, do you want to encrypt your home dataset during user creation? And then nothing is done to decrypt it on login. We have that PAM module. It does not have a man page. It should have a man
Okay,
page.
that's a good point.
It should be mentioned in the handbook, but it is not. But I had it working. The big problem is that without it, your home dir is owned by root and absolutely unwritable and completely empty except for the dot and dot entries.
Interesting.
So there's only a placeholder mount point. So there is a file system mounted, but it is not the real dataset content. That's how dataset encryption behaves. And especially when you try to log in with SSH public keys, let's say you install, you say, yes, I want to do server configuration, you set up the public key authentication, and then you're locked out because your home dir is encrypted. And the authorized key files is in your home dir. You can't do that, but it's not unusual for users to expect to be able to have their authorized key file somewhere. And yes, you can configure SSH to do it in such a way that it does an PAM authentication sets up a PAM session and asks for a password or something like that.
Okay.
We would require some testing so that maybe it only asks for a PAM password when the home DR is not already mounted or something like that. So
Okay.
that you can use public key login once your home DR is decrypted. But yes.
So that said, I
It's
remember what this was from. I just tried it and I wanted to do a quick lab password. And we've
Mhm.
touched on this in recent calls, but if you put in, say, test as a password, it doesn't meet OpenZFS's rather than FreeBSD's password length requirement. And
Okay.
it does not fail gracefully. It doesn't re-ask for a longer password. It just sort of continues skipping the encryption part, and who knows what the state is that comes out of that. So,
The
uh,
state which comes out of that is easy to understand.
yeah, okay, thank you, Jan.
It's nothing really dangerous. It just means it will put at worst ask multiple times because it considers the password technically invalid, even if it's the correct one. If it has some minimum password length requirement. I don't know if you can reduce that so that you can have a short test password, but if you don't, eventually you will fall through and that PAM module will fail. And if it is not optional, so if it is requisite or required, then your PAM authentication will fail and you won't get in.
Okay, well, basically the installer fails, or adduser more
What?
specifically, adduser
Okay.
fails, and I'll show you the
Okay,
tick
if add
for
user
that.
fails, at least it doesn't let you even set up the too short invalid whatever password, which is good.
Oh, well, yeah, but it doesn't ask
Because
again.
then
It
add
doesn't do
user will
anything
just
gracefully.
prompt you for all the inputs again.
It does not prompt for the inputs again, and that's the problem I was pointing out.
Oh,
Well, here's
thanks.
the ticket.
Thank you.
Yep, and here's a text from it. I can make that pretty, I suppose.
I
Okay,
probably
so
used a strong enough password with my tests then.
yeah, well, if I know this machine will be wiped out in a few minutes, I'm like, oh, test or no password, which VM images
I
ship with
think
no
I used something
password.
like FUBA 1234 or something.
Okay, well, good. That's long enough and then of course the philosophical question is that, okay, is it ZFS's responsibility to be super fancy on uh, password hygiene? Some say it's Pam's requirement, whereas Rob very rightfully said, hey, that's an in-base component. It should be meaningfully useful as is, such that yes, you should have a real password, but then again,
Um,
adduser and ZFS are kind of
so
have different policies, I suppose. And how do we
yes, but
say that?
PAM is about PAM sessions and login and authentication and authorization, whereas ZFS dataset encryption can be used without any user-specific stuff. So maybe it does something root does or some service does. So there's no need for you to go through PAM. You could just run the ZFS load key command.
If you're given an opportunity to.
Yes, and if it's not your home DR, or if you can log in without a meaningful home DR, then that's not a problem
Well, feel
for
free
a
to read the ticket.
sufficiently informed user. So it technically works, but it is a nice foot gun
Yes.
that the installer asks you to encrypt if you want to encrypt your home DR. It's not crazy to expect that a significant minority of the users will think, hey, that's a good idea, let's encrypt my home DR, and then end up with a really annoying state.
Okay. So there are many factors here, but I'll show you what happens if you just type in there.
Mhm.
If you type in test, it gives you a warning that the passphrase is too short, but then adduser kind of just
Mhm.
keeps moving on. Well, actually, maybe it failed totally, but that's having it retry and say, yo, ironically, it tells you what's wrong, but it won't let you deal with it. So anyway,
Yeah, that's not good. It should just
Yeah, I
tell,
can just fix that right now.
yeah, that command should just give you another chance to enter a password. And if you type in the empty password, it should disable encryption and tell you so that you kind of, oh yeah, you gave me an empty password, so you canceled your attempt
but
to set up encryption.
And it should print a message if it does so.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we can
Uh,
fix that.
That should be like
I don't
20
know why
line
that's
source code
scrolling.
change.
So in theory, I'm reopening that. We can see the comment that someone else added. Let's scroll down to that from Modic. That's where the PAM ZFS key .so came up. This is really a
So
ZFS bug limitation. So
no,
there
this
you
is
have
an
it.
add user limitation bug that add user does not handle the rejection by ZFS gracefully. So add
Correct.
user is prompting for the password, I think, not directly the ZFS command. So it is
Correct.
add user's responsibility to gracefully handle a rejected password.
As long as the encrypted home directory support is not filled with other foot guns, as you've hinted at. So
The foot gun is that the installer does not enable the PAM module because as long as you use passwords for authenticating as a user, the PAM module can be used just like the PAM SSH module can be used to authenticate a user against the dataset encryption password instead of against the stored password, or even both, even if that's narrowing. You
okay.
can also just have the first module prompt and then have the other try the already entered password. So as long as the user password and the encryption password are the same, you're only asked once, which works great for PAM SSH on laptops or workstations, where you actually sit in front of the hardware, you get asked, hey, user, what's your SSH passphrase? You type that in and you get a PAM session with an already running SSH agent.
Okay. So
It's
briefly,
maybe not the
philosophically,
perfect
go ahead.
security stance, but it is a good trade-off, in my
Okay.
opinion.
So FreeBSD can tolerate empty passwords. OpenZFS cannot. Which one is right? Which one's wrong? Are they both equally right,
Eh?
equally wrong? OpenZFS native encryption will not tolerate an empty password, for better or for worse.
No, it will not tolerate passwords with less than 8 characters.
That's a more accurate way. One of the many varieties of input below 8 characters is nothing. So
Yes, and
it will not take
so
nothing through eight
my
characters.
my interpretation is that if you're being asked for the password by the add user command
Please.
and you type in the empty encryption password, it should tell you basically cancel dataset encryption because you gave no password. If you give a password between 1 and 7 characters inclusive, it should tell you your password is too short. You need at least 8 characters. Maybe it should even tell you the first time. And then you just have an other chance to enter passwords until you either type in the empty password or a long enough password.
Exactly.
That's the same behavior here. So you want to give the user an out by entering the empty password. 1 to 7, remind the user that they need an 8 or longer and can abort with an empty password.
But what if they want a 6-character password for reasons?
Lab use. I want to
Then
just
they
put in
have
like
to
test
patch
or less.
OpenZFS.
Exactly. And then it becomes a philosophical question, is that in 2025 in an audited world, is that ever reasonable, or should we have it doing all kinds of checks? Should ZFS say, well, you need a number, a character, or this and a that, which I really prefer it
Oh
not.
yeah, you could also require
A
it to
can of
have
worms.
password strength checker so that it does a dictionary attack and rainbow table
Exactly.
attack
It's like, where do
and
we take this?
history against your last 32 passwords or whatever.
1.5 gigabyte
Similarity
module.
analysis to
Yeah.
previous passwords, whatever.
So anyway, you see the point, the little tip of the iceberg this question is. But yes, it would be nice if FreeBSD didn't just slap users in the face saying, "Oh, well, gee, you're actually you're good yet short password if that
And
is
it,
contradictory, whatever." But hey, it's not handling it well at the moment. But
it
we
definitely shouldn't bubble up the implementation details as an
Mhm.
error and then do nothing.
Agreed. Great. Okay, well, there's the ticket. You've seen it. So let's move on to A bigger one, a even more controversial philosophical one, any notion of libzfs and includes in FreeBSD, specifically Illumos is Illumos and has generally things within reach, and I do not know how GNU Linux distributions generally handle this. However, Jan, we have you to thank for making a nifty little utility that has some very simple yet clear dependencies on some ZFS headers.
So
And after discussing this for like 6 to 12 months, I finally came up with a PR. So I've posted it. It's out there. I did my best to convey it.
please
We've
reload
gone
that
back and
PR.
oh, great, you've added something. I appreciate that. Reloading. We identified what you felt within
If it is the right
base
PR, you
sources.
should have
Hmm.
comments from me.
Yeah, it's been sitting there for a while. It's hopefully reloaded.
Yep,
Okay, it looks like you've
perhaps.
given an example of usage. Good boy.
So the issue here is we have the libzfs core, which in its current state is an incomplete attempt to come up with a committed stable interface, but you cannot even append to the zpool history log. So you're basically not supposed to do any writing operation which should show up in the log, because if you then run zpool history, you would not see the result until you use the, I think, -I flag or -L to show the implementation detail level stuff instead of the high level logging interface. History. So yeah, because to generate the right kind of structure for the ioctl to append to the log, you need the full libzfs, because the types to do it are not available in libzfs core. Also, FreeBSD lacks two headers. They're just not installed. They're only part of the kernel sources to even build against libzfs core, the supposedly stable but incomplete API. So it's just as is not possible to build against libzfs core despite its limitations in FreeBSD. As far as I know, this is not the case on Linux. They installed the necessary headers.
Ah,
FreeBSD omitted them from the set of installed headers. If you add 4 more headers, you can actually build against the full libzfs on FreeBSD. You need these 6 files. If I remember correctly, all of them are under CDDL. So thankfully, CDDL is not the GPL, so it is not viral across file boundaries. You're fully within your rights to take those files, put them in a config directory, leave them unmodified, and ship them with even closed source executables. That's fine. You could also then start a debate on if the headers are actually copyrightable at all, but that's not decided.
different call, different call.
Yes. So yeah, but anyone making use of libzfs from a port or their own homegrown stuff, which isn't even available through a port, should understand that libzfs is not a public API. There are no compatibility guarantees at the API or ABI level, but OpenZFS has matured enough that frequent breakage is unlikely. So you may have to chase OpenZFS releases, but at the source code level, I'm pretty sure it's going to stay easy to follow libzfs.
So, Andrew, I believe you advocated for a notion of a more accessible libzfs. And for full context and disclosure, this was a topic at the Developer Summit. Welcome, Eva. And well, Joshua reiterated things that were said at the time and said to this date that, well, that's just not, was never a goal yet. Do check out, oh, do I have it here? Oh, it's in the
The other thing is that
PR is Rob's blog post on improving
it,
libcfs. Go ahead, Jan, as our
so
initiator of this.
Joshua's point that the commands provide the stable interface and may be run through stuff like pfexec or sudo. And yes, that's all true, but it completely misses the point that there's a prohibitive cost to running the commands every time you need an information for something like Samba. Samba can't just run random giant ZFS list commands and then pass the JSON output if the right subcommand even provides JSON support already.
And are there
Yeah.
then, say, atomicity limits such that, we'd
That
rather be doing this all with channel programs and we really want things to be at whatever level nicely
yes
bundled
and
up in
no,
transaction groups?
because you can use the ZFS program command to run a channel program. So using the library interface is not inherently better in that regard. Basically, the ZFS program command is a fairly thin wrapper around the right functions to hand a bunch of Lua code to the kernel and have it run it with an argument passed as an NV list. And getting back an NV list within a certain number of bytecode, opcodes, and memory limit.
Okay. Then one final point there. Would this help with a little love at the Samba end? Would this resolve things like Samba shadow copy VFS being more easily built and shipped with FreeBSD from ports and packages such that you can just suddenly have it working out of the box rather than chasing stable-ish versions of VFS headers as TrueNAS does?
You should be able to do exactly that.
Okay, then don't get me wrong. One could argue Samba is held back on FreeBSD because it doesn't have that feature, and maybe that's why Linux is shipping with them. So yeah, I've sent that across the bow. I've done my best to convey the situation, and hopefully something comes out of it.
What you can do on FreeBSD is you can, in fact, kind of, instead of copying the files into a contrib directory within your Samba VFS module or whatever, you can also depend on the presence of the kernel sources and get the files from there.
Got it. Okay.
That's kind of what BECTL does, but it puts in a lot more than the minimum necessary set. So its C environment is basically polluted with Solaris names to a far higher degree. Stuff like its struct UUID is incompatible with certain FreeBSD headers because it has the Solaris struct UUID. And yes, I stumbled over that trying to use UUID functions from libc. Suddenly, I couldn't get out of the fields because, oops, they now have the Solaris names. And sure, for UUID, you could easily define your own type and then use type punning or whatever, but come on, please.
So, dear listeners, world, etc., I would love to get some eyes on that. And thank you, Jan, for putting in sample code and makefile. And you'll notice there's an attached C file. And because
the C file is also in the table.
Excellent.
I just copied the two most important files.
Excellent.
Because everything else is just the copied out files and the directory structure containing them.
I appreciate that. And because it only adds 4 to 6 files to the base OS, hopefully someone will make a persuasive argument that this could be included in 15.0. But there I said it. Fingers crossed. Hopefully we come to the most perfect solution to all of that. And thanks for all involved.
While
Yes, Andrew.
one other thing, the bigger point of my complaint about the lack of support for um, libzfs
Yes,
and
please.
libzpool was the more libzpool side, because while sure I can machine parse absolutely anything if I try hard enough, the the zpool command output is clearly not remotely intended to be machine parsed. And as far as I'm aware, at least parts of that to this day still do not have a machine parsable format.
So when the recent JSON, was it, output arrived, did it not cover all things?
Um, Admittedly, the machine I'm looking at is an older one.
That's okay. Well, fine, fair enough. But so there was a celebrated effort to address that with like structured output. However, you're suggesting that might still miss a few things.
I'm not sure if they improved the output for zpool, and that may have addressed my complaint.
Right, but it's also a decade or so late in the game. It's awesome, but the systems out there generally don't have it.
So yes, but we're slowly gaining at least JSON output format. As I stated in these calls before, in my opinion, a reasonable compromise for things which need to talk programmatically to ZFS would be to have a kind of ZFS serve command, which would be a line-based simple protocol or a JSON-based protocol where you just send the ZFS and zpool commands to a long-running process and get machine-readable output, so that you can just run it like you would run something like an init server or whatever, and you just send it commands and get responses back, so that you don't pay the cost of starting a dynamically linked executable and then parsing ad hoc formats and so on. Instead, just make it so that I can have a server I spawn as a child with something like popenr plus on FreeBSD at least, where we have bidirectional popen support. And yeah, allow me to write to requests to it and get the responses back without having to run the commands every time.
Got it. Cool.
And if we had this, okay, maybe it requires some changes, because I'm pretty sure the ZFS and zpool commands make the assumption that they are short-lived command line tools and don't have to be overly precise with resource sys, and can just allocate a bunch of stuff and expect the kernel to clean up after them. Because call-in exit is a great garbage collector. It's really efficient.
Yep.
But it's not feasible for this kind of ZFS zpool serve command. But with that, you could keep the C API internal and make available an API service, which keeps the boundary close to basically what the commands do.
Okay. Anything else on that topic? Thank you, Eva, for your patience. So there was some fantastic news last week about Linux changing its APIs again, and then Rob's comment was Shrug working on it. So already on it. So there's should be nothing to explore there. So the schedule's been jumbled around. I've pushed it back an hour to accommodate Rob, who is in Australia. However, with just all of us running on autopilot, many showed up at the normal time. At the previous normal time, Eva and I were getting back to block tracing and workload replay because from the various calls relating to the upcoming summit, there has been a very strong, consistent, repeated call for standard tests and workloads one can run on ZFS systems to have vaguely reproducible results on perhaps even different architectures or even the same pool with different OSs, et cetera, et cetera. We have been tracking that on this Google Doc. I hope to move to something like Collabora. I will put this in the chat for all of you. And I see a comment. If you want to force me to acknowledge this database, define. Okay, Jan, drop that comment in the main doc if you feel it's appropriate.
I just wanted to say that if OpenZFS really wants to make it clear that you're entering implementation-specific realm of OpenZFS and not the stable interface, make the user redefine something like define libzfs is really an internal API as a macro before including the header. And then kind of the application developer was forced to acknowledge that they're doing something more or less naughty and get what they deserve. But don't presume to just insist that users are holding it wrong if they're the use case. Make them acknowledge that you're not promising them anything, but let them get on with their work. And if I read the Pharonics article, I get the impression that this is a real nice jerk move by the Linux ZFS developers, because it basically made it impossible to implement an out-of-tree writable file system.
You said the Linux OpenZFS developers or file
The
system
Linux VFS developers.
VFS, thank you. V and Z are quite similar. Thank you for
Sorry,
clarifying.
the virtual file system layer.
Yes.
In Linux, it was effectively crippled so that you can't have a non-GPL writable file system because you can't flush your dirty pages, if I understand that correctly, which kind of reads intentional. Let's put it like that. You wouldn't overlook this if you do something like that. If you didn't want, if you didn't consider it a feature that you broke all the non-GPL file systems.
Well, if you ever go to like the Linux Discord channels with like the people my age that are from the GPL side of things, they say that, you know, BSDL is immoral and all this kind of stuff. Like they like really have a strong ideological stance. Is very trendy right now in the GPL camp. So, you know, that's, I've said this before, like it's going to happen, like it's going to keep happening. Like all it takes is for like a small amount of people to be like, oh, we should implement some not invented here syndrome so that you know, we force those filthy corpos out of here.
The funny thing is that they're the filthy corpos, or the shilling.
Of course, we know.
Because if you look at the amount of commits to the Linux kernel by, let's say, independent developers, it's like, how many percent now? 30 or less, right?
I don't actually know, but I know that I'm 100% just representing me in FreeBSD. And I know that we have a lot of the work in FreeBSD is really strongly driven by passionate people who believe in for any people, for any purpose, period. And part of those purpose is feeding themselves.
So I also get that sometimes you want to protect the user's freedom and not the developer's freedom.
Okay, this is not the time and place to go down that ancient.
This is protecting
neither.
This is protecting the whoever has right access to the Git repository's freedom to decide that this API is now forbidden to be existed. It's
okay.
kind of just You're not
So
allowed to bring that back as a kernel module either, I assume. Or you can't because it's not an exported symbol.
save it for the
Um,
shilling corpus
I'm
call.
sure you can somehow
Wait,
work
we have
around
a
that.
shilling corpus
No.
production user call?
Yes, it takes place right after the network overlay call and the documentation call and the
Uh-huh.
endless list of potential topics to address in a similar format. So I will describe this extremely briefly. Here's the document. It's in the document, if that makes sense, to go see what we've been doing. And that said, this was the most clear example of what I think we want to achieve, which is here are some workloads. Thank you, William Kettler, for making some amount of effort to reproduce the behavior of a mail server, an SMB server, video editing effort, databases, build, you name it. I haven't looked at these in depth, but that is again, perfect example using FIO. Now, moving on to the next tab, ever so slowly, there is a canonical post from Asia, and it describes using Linux block trace to trace workloads and play them back. There was a whole bunch of SNIA activity relating to that a decade or so ago, but from what I can tell, no one is busy with that. I will continue to click and move this tab over. There we go. Boom. So thank you, Hungwei Chu, about this article, which it's all linked there. And he goes into how that was used using the Linux block trace facilities. Block trace, block parse, so kind of in and out. And now to bring it to the punchline, and hopefully this is the best intro ever. If I am not mistaken, Eva, you have made an effort to replicate that functionality. Welcome, and can you tell us about this? And in a perfect world, demonstrate this because I'm very excited about this work.
Yeah, so this is one of the two approaches, high-level approaches that we were talking about. So generally, we're on the ZFS call. We're going to talk about ZFS, but when we're talking about workload tracing and sort of cross OS compatibility specific to tracing IO, we want to cover both ZFS specific setups and non-ZFS, right?
Fair enough.
If we're going to do block trace and everything else on Linux, we can use that with the majority of the file systems other than ZFS. And if we're going to do that on FreeBSD, then we need something that supports geom. And so this dtrace focuses on capturing IO out of the geom provider. However, I am looking at a markdown document that describes the method for doing a similar approach, but using ZFS specific dtrace calls. And so while the geom one is very useful and interesting and so forth, particularly good for embedded systems that we're not running OpenZFS on. The reason why I started with the geom one is because it's easier to start off. And the source code is much more concise, right, for doing the analysis and then working with dtrace. So I figured I'd put my time into that one first. And so that's what we have there. And then the one that I need to commit to that same repository is substantially longer due to the complexity differences. And it takes, it basically looks at a bunch of the source from OpenZFS after the merge, and then source code before the merge that has been floating around on the internet, right? Different versions have different everything and so forth. But you can't go back in time too much, right? So an attempt has been made to do the analysis on the most recent source, but in order to look at dtrace stuff for OpenZFS, the tragedy of people departing Sun after Oracle, and politics and Linux getting more popular and so on and so on. A lot of the dtrace specific stuff is either for Linux, or the dtrace stuff is for things that happened before FreeBSD merged OpenZFS, right? So that analysis has taken a little bit longer to go through. So this one is ready to test with the Geom provider. The one that's specific to ZFS that I'm going to commit today, hopefully, also needs to be tested, but requires more discussion before we do that to standardize everything, right? So in both directions, I think we need to have a conversation around the expected minimum as far as hardware is concerned, with a preference towards not having machines with a terabyte of RAM, right? But just a bunch of machines that we can get that effectively fill these different roles that you and I have discussed, right? So, and I mean operational roles, right? Like capturing I/O on a system that handles HA proxy versus traffic that is on a database server, or storage specific cluster is going to be different. And so the machine requirements for those different types of production tiers should be at least noted, right? And so even if we have our standard baseline, this has 4 cores, it's got 32 gigs of RAM or whatever it is we happen to find as a good minimum to base this off of, so that we can maximize the amount of existing hardware, so that we're not kind of pigeonholing certain workloads into this can only run on a huge machine. So I think we should have a discussion around that part, right? Baseline hardware requirements to do the testing. And then we need to talk about load generators as far as the hardware required for that as well, and what we expect to have for bandwidth and latency values across the load generator to the destination system, and whether or not that's going through a switch or if it's going direct, it should be noted as well. So I think it's a good place to start.
Hey, Jan, you have your hand up.
Yes, so if I understand you correctly, what you're doing right now is you're tracing the entry/exit points to the geom layer with dtrace.
Yes.
And the next step you want to try is to find the call sites inside of OpenZFS, which call into the OS-specific block layer in FreeBSD that would be geom, right?
Yeah, effectively. But I want to have it so that I don't know if this is completely achievable, but I would prefer to have the ZFS dtrace script be as potentially compatible with dtrace on Linux as on FreeBSD. I don't know how realistic that is, but
is that FIO works at the system call layer through the file system. So wouldn't you want to capture the workload you're wanting to reproduce at the system call level instead of the block level?
I think it depends on what approach we want to use for replayability. So if we're capturing system traces as opposed to block traces, then that necessitates having the system level be reproduced exactly. Whereas if we have the I/O that's happening, that's just the block level, that can be replayed even if we have a slightly different kernel or different architecture or something like that.
Replaying the block level wouldn't test the file system. It would only basically test the disk drivers and queuing around that.
Yeah, so what we want to make sure we're doing first, though, is capturing the block level I/O that has a representation of the information coming into the system, regardless of what the system is going to do with it, right? So there's different approaches. I guess we could say I think it's relevant to try both.
But at the level where you're capturing the workload and trying to reproduce them, you would have to replay them on a block device, not on a file system, right?
Yes.
Okay, then I understood what you're doing. Thank you for, because I was confused how you wanted to teach file to reproduce the block pattern through the indirection of ZFS. But if you're not
Yeah, I want to
trying to,
separate that for sure.
if you're trying to do it below the file system layer, then it all makes sense, your approach. I just had an invalid assumption.
Welcome, Stu. You've jumped right into this, and our kind of sequence is all over the place. Eva, is this something you are rigged up to give a quick demo of, or are you going to focus on working on approach 2?
I have testing machines set up, but they're not set up for like right now with a
Okay,
meeting or
cool.
anything. Yeah.
And broadly, how would you summarize your hardware concerns? Is it something anyone can try, and something about not pigeonholing into workloads and hardware and you name it? Is this
Yeah,
an
my hope
equal
is that
opportunity? Go ahead.
exactly, yeah. You just described it. Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
cool.
want to lock people into like a specific type of specification that requires bare metal systems that are really beefy or anything. So as a result, I've been kind of tailoring this to the equipment that I do have at least a number of replicas of. So that offers different ranges of specifications, right? So like I have 3 basic categories there. The first being small ARM embedded systems, the next being Intel-based embedded systems. Both of those are 8-core machines with anywhere from 8 to 32 gigs of RAM. And then the more enterprise type of Dell systems that are 32 cores and 256 gigs of RAM and they're decent, but it's a more, I want to have those 3 categories generally speaking, so that when people do want to test this, they can go and even if they're not meeting the spec exactly, they can try those 3 different areas of focus.
Is there a chance that
Dion?
you could come up with a model by doing some statistics on the captured traces to then reproduce the patterns you detected, so that you could have a generator which emits an I/O pattern which is similar to the one you captured for an arbitrary size without having to fit the pattern into memory? So basically generate me something which puts a similar enough load on the disks.
Well, ideally, yeah, we don't want to have everything fit into RAM. There should be some manner of streaming that goes through, any of the larger captures.
Or even just getting rid of the data in the capture, so that you know that, hey, this is incompressible or compressible of this length and this location, so that you can find a more compact encoding than a full I/O trace, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. Separating out the type of data from the application that's being tested for reproducibility, right? We don't want to be like if we compare it over to like PCAPs, we don't want to be tracking.
You don't want PCAPs off your disk.
Yeah, we don't want to have these massive captures, of raw I/O that are very challenging just to store somewhere, right? So.
And that's how we get there, but the whole notion of FIO workload modeling is you establish that and go from there with the best effort. Of course, there will always be anomalies, but the example I like to use is I'm curious what the storage patterns of the 1996 ftp.cd-rom.com box look like, and how would we reproduce those on a Raspberry Pi, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead, Jan.
Eva, when you're replaying this, does your capture know the barriers between IOs? So does it know when, if you now have a twice as fast disk to tinker with, does it know that it can't just play stuff twice as fast because there are dependencies between the operations?
So we haven't gotten into that level of detail yet, but that is something that should be taken into account for sure.
Questions for Eva? I've dominated this discussion and prefer not, and I'm just giddy over the promise of this. I'll leave it at that. Yes, Stu. Unless that was not a grunt from Stu. You're muted. Eva's not muted, so I guess the two of us can continue. Yeah, welcome, Stu.
Was not I.
Okay. That is very, very impressive progress, and if I'm not mistaken, that is day job related, and that could hopefully result in consistent, amazing things.
It is both day job related, and I have a sustained hobby of enterprise hardware. So it's both.
Fantastic. Did you bump into any architectural, say, Intel versus ARM issues and deal breakers and surprises?
Not yet.
Excellent.
So I'm sure that will come up.
One annoying limitation you will probably run into is that dtrace on ARM64 lacks instruction tracing support, so you cannot instrument inline functions. Because ARM is a lot harder to emulate the way dtrace does it, because it basically relocates the code, and it's so easy in ARM to reference the program counter that you cannot just copy the code into another page and run it there and expect things to work, because it's so common for ARM64 code, or even more of ARM32 code, to use PC relative addressing. So you would need a fairly complete emulator to allow instruction tracing. And that has not yet been written for FreeBSD at least. And I think Illumos doesn't really support ARM64, so they haven't solved that problem for us. The only workaround is to either make sure the functions aren't inlined so that you can do that. Yeah, or you have to create static trace points.
Well, I think we'll probably have a lot to discuss once I move over to doing specific ARM testing a little bit more in depth. All the ARM systems I have right here are set up for the GM provider arrangements. So all of my really fun ARM boxes are over with Michael. So I think you might just have to allocate some of those as such.
Yes, and remarkably, the ThunderX is from Rebecca is the most reliable with Beehive. The honeycombs throw an error that I have documented in another PR, and I'm running a build option survey that you can hear in the background. Not quite on ARM, and yes, I'm pushing quite enthusiastically more than ever. So thank you for those, and my experience with FreeBSD on ARM has been a little bumpy. It was not as plug and play as expected, short of with the ThunderX. Stu, do you have any topics, questions, ideas, concerns? Gardening stories? It's nice weather here in Portland and Vancouver.
Nope, not at this point.
Okay, but Stu, you reminded me to remind the people that the OpenZFS User and Developer Summit is taking place in Portland, Oregon on October. You are cordially welcome. Some pretty amazing people have registered for that. Matt's got his tickets. Garrett Woolman, who was a star last year, has registered. And I have invited Brian Cantrell to discuss just how correctly OpenZFS needs to handle its reviews to allow for a reintegration with Illumos. I don't know if he'll make it, but the conversations like the one earlier on the libzfs is exactly the kind of topics to discuss in that environment. We have a patron from Patreon present. Thank you, Eva, for joining in on that. If you look for, I think, /c/call for testing, upon request, it wasn't my idea. I don't need something more to maintain, but I've put that up and people have been very kind with that. And I'm even looking at other more controversial methods of funding, be it cryptocurrencies from, say, long ago that someone hopefully did produced with very little ecological impact, as opposed to the current trends, which are concerning. Any other topics, questions, ideas? You name it. Funny puns. I do like what was it? The Corpo Shilling call.
Corporate Shilling production users call.
Yes, yes.
We should make t-shirts.
Indeed, and I've been cleaning up the list of those. They are in the related hackathon doc that I believe is at the top there. If not, we can hop over to that tab and enjoy. But let's call it good. We are at, what, 16 after? And Alexander, would you like the honors?
Like and subscribe.
Thank you. And in the big picture, I'd love to come up with an even more clever alternative to that little phrase. So get on it, everybody. You rock. Thank you so much. And thank you, Eva, for that amazing, inspiring code.